Today we are going to go through some of the functionality of the new cross-section tool that we have added to our latest release, Petrosys PRO 2023.1. So this is the agenda that we'll go over today. So a little bit of our latest release. And then obviously the focus of today's session is the cross-section model. So a couple of slides to highlight the key functionality that we have added to this module. And then a short demonstration or I'll play around a little bit about the functionality that we have in the tool. And I'll show you two examples on how to work with this cross-section model. In one, we will launch the cross-section from within mapping. And in the second example, we'll start from scratch and we'll use a bit of drag and drop to build our section. So as I said, this core release, which has this new tool, the cross-section model, it was released last month, a couple of weeks ago. It's a brand new module, the cross-section module. So if you're familiar with Petrosys PRO, you know that our three main applications were mapping, surface modeling, and 3D viewer. We have added a new one, which is the cross-section module. Also, another key feature of this release is a fault statistics tool that we have added to the mapping application, which gives users access to plotting capabilities, thematic mapping of the faults, editing functionality, and much more. So about the cross-section module, as I said, it's a completely new application that we have added to the software to generate cross-section. There are multiple ways of working with this module, and I'll show you some of those, the most common ones. So you can use a single line, well traverse, or just a single well section. So the common ways to build cross sections. At this stage, we can display well data, including logs, horizons, fault surfaces, and GIS data can be added to the section. The properties, the layout properties can be customized to suit each section that is created in Petrosys PRO. So I'll show you a little bit as well on how to play with the tools, the layout properties, and to have a final map ready, a final cross section that you can share in multiple formats, right? So that is in a nutshell what it can do. So just go quickly through some of those main functionalities. As I said, we have a new cross-section display. It looks similar to this screenshot that I have on the presentation. You can use drag and drop. So if you're familiar with the drag and drop from multiple sources into mapping and surface modeling, that same capability has been added to this cross-section model. So you can drag and drop point data from Excel or shape files into the cross-section, or from raster and grids and or data from Petrel and decision space in the same way that you work with mapping and surface modeling. And I'll show a bit specifically in the second example. I'll show you two guys how that works. So as I mentioned, we can display well data. So you can display well data from the display menu or using the drag and drop. You can display well logs. So if you are familiar with log signatures in the mapping section or the 3D viewer, we also have the capability to display log data as a part of type of data into your cross section. You have the ability to display horizons and zones, and I'll show you how to populate those zones and how to get the most out of it. And we also have the ability to display fault surfaces. So if you have fault surface data from your third-party application that you want to display into Petrosys, that's something that you can add and display as a part of your cross section. As I said, you have the ability to assign zones or to force a particular zone that you want, or different options that you have when you work with a new cross section model, right? So there is some additional functionality that we have added. So the ability to flatten the section based on a particular structure, the ability to share the cursor. So I'll show you a little bit about the cursor tracking between 3D viewer, mapping, and the cross-section module. We have the ability to auto populate zones, so Petrosys will do the best to assign the zones. Obviously, as a geoscientist, you then have to verify that the zone assigned has the right ones, or to override the auto populate options. Obviously, if you're familiar with Petrosys, we always have a lot of options to control the style of how those data looks, and that's the same for the cross section tool as well. And I'll show you a little bit how to manually move the section line either from mapping or from within the cross section tool itself. So to make it bigger, the envelope, or to scroll and to rotate the section line. So sort of things that you expect us to do, and I'll show you how that works. And also the display of GIS data. So if you have point data with a set value associated to that, like for example, on Excel spreadsheet, you can display and make it part of your cross-section tool. And that's something that I'll also show you in the demonstration in a bit. So that's in a nutshell. Obviously, sorry, and the last bit is that we have a link to the 3D viewer. So you have your cross section, and from within the cross section, you can launch the 3D viewer. So any data that you have in the cross section will be carried across into the 3D viewer as well. So you can have a integrated workflow within all the main application of Petrosys PRO, right? So that's in a nutshell what the cross section tool does. This is the first release, so the idea is to add additional functionality as we progress in this current release, in this cycle of this release. But yeah, that's what we have developed for this first release, and that's what I'll show you in a second. So I'll exit the presentation and I now move into the demo that I will demonstrate. So as I said, this is the new release, Petrosys PRO 2023. As I showed you earlier, we have a new module, cross-section module. And for this first example of a workflow, I'll start from within mapping. So you'll notice this is a final map where we have a few surfaces and log data, and also some 4 polygons as well. You'll notice that now from within mapping, we have a link to the 3D viewer, which was present from the previous release, and a link to the cross-section tool. Pretty much what it does, either of these icons, if you are clicking the 3D viewer or the cross-section, it will carry the data that we have in our display list in mapping, and it will carry into any of those applications. So the idea is that as a user, you don't have to recreate display lists in each of one of those applications. You build it in one of them, and then you launch the other application from within each other, and that helps you to simplify your workflow. So before moving into the 3D viewer, I'll just quickly launch before moving into the cross-section tool, let's say that I want to check this all this data in the 3D viewer as well. So I'm gonna turn on these 4 sticks here, and I'm gonna launch the 3D viewer just as a generic workflow that any our users do. It's always good to catch up and visualize the data in a 3D environment. So as I mentioned, once I launch the 3D viewer from within Petrosys, all the data that we see here is carried across into the 3D viewer. And let me make this a bit bigger here, and let's make this a bit here. So I have those 4 sticks and those structures carry on into the 3D viewer. So if I turn off the surfaces as well, and if I turn off the sticks, I see, for example, the log data that I have been displaying in my mapping window is also being selected when I move into the 3D viewer. So I have my log signature. In this case, obviously not as a small log signature, but as display along the well path. So that's one of the things that we have been working with. So if I think that all this data makes sense as from the 3D viewer point of view, then I can go back to my mapping module. And now I'm going to launch the cross-section application from within mapping. So if I hover over this icon here, which is the one that allows me to launch the cross-section tool. So I click OK. So before actually releasing the cross-section tool, it gives me this panel from the cross-section module, which allows me to choose the type of section that I want to build in my model. So we have 4 options, and each one of those 4 options will have different parameters that we need to set. So if we start with the envelope one, so it's very simple. We have a cross section defined by a section line, and we have the option to increase or decrease the size of the envelope. So in this case, is this amount. I can type it manually, or if I click over the cross section and I hold the shift key and start to scroll my wheel mouse, it will increase or decrease the size. If I want to rotate the section line, I hold now the Control key and then scroll the wheel and the mouse, and that will change the section. That's one way of doing it here. I can also do it manually. I can decrease and increase the size. And that's how you can define the section line here. There are other options. As I mentioned, multi-point, as the name says, is basically I just click different points of the section that I want to build. If I want to delete a point, I just right click and it will delete the last point. Then we have the well traverse option. So it will go from well to well. So if you see when I hover my mouse over any well, it will change the cursor to a hand mode, means that it will snap to that particular well. And then I can build a well traverse option, a section line based on well traverse. If I want to finalize that line, I just double click and I have my section envelope. Notice that in my panel now, it says all the wells that have been involved in this particular option. And the same goes for each one of the options. So if it is well path, then it will be along just one particular well. It tells you the well that is involved. So this is a section only specific around the well path. So let's go back to the first option, which is the envelope option, which is the one that I want to stick around. So you see, let me make it something like this, and let me hover like this, and let me make it something like this. So let's say that I want to make a section line over this area here, which I think is my prospect, and that's the one that I want to work with. So if I'm satisfied with the azimuth and the length of that cross section, then I'm ready to launch the cross section. When we talk about envelope, it means that any data that it will find within this length, it will be projected into the section line. So it's important to explain that a little bit there. So I'm gonna now launch the cross section itself based on these parameters that I have for this section line. So I click launch cross section, and it will launch my cross-section tool. So if I now, I'm going to put them side by side at the beginning. So it's, let me move it something like here. So like this. So it's going to populate my cross-section tool with the same type of data that I had in my map. So at this stage, I can work with the two of them, the mapping application and the cross-section tool, and I have a section plan here on my bottom left. So the way the cross-section is structured, the cross-section model, we have a display list similar to the one that we have in mapping. We have the 3D view, we have our actual cross-section, and we have a schematic of the map, a section plan. So basically, you will see the outline of the 3D grids that we have here that have been carried across into this cross section, and also you will see the well data that I have been that I'm displaying here. So because all the wells here have been carried as well into this one. So I have those wells seen here in the section plan. So any type of data that we add here, I could see here in the section plan, and I see the section line at this stage in both of the applications, either in mapping or within the cross-section itself. So if I wanted to modify it here, for example, I can see how that cross-section will be modified live. So if I, for example, start to increase and move, I see how that cross-section is modified live. If I wanted to rotate, I can see how that rotates in the mapping window, but also it rotates in my section plan, and it see how it has an impact right away in my map, in my cross-section tool. So the same thing that I used to do before. So for example, if I did a well traverse option, I will go well by well. And if I double click to close it, now that has been updated automatically into my cross-section tool, my cross-section model. I see how that section has been automatically updated, and my cross-section has been automatically updated at the same time. So I can do it from here, link to mapping, or I can just close this particular panel, minimize mapping, increase the size of my cross-section tool to have my whole screen, and then now just keep working from here. So I have the same option on the top here, and instead of doing it from the mapping window, I do it from the section plan. So if I click envelope, and I have this option here. So now let's do the same thing. Let's rotate it because I want the cross-section to go somewhere like this. And let's say that this is pretty much what I want, the type of cross-section that I want to work with. And let's increase the size a little bit of the envelope. So let's say that I have, this is the section line that I want to represent. Now it's about improving how that cross-section works, right? So first, let's display some fault surface data. So let's go to display fault surface. In this case, as in any case with Petrosys, you can display data from any of these sources. In this case, I'm going to display some fault surfaces coming from Petrel, which I have connected to this particular Petrosys project. And this is the style that I'm going to display those fault surfaces. I click OK. So it's reading data from the source, and in a few seconds, we'll have that fault surfaces display in my cross section. So I have now my fault surfaces. Let's start working with the actual cross section and to make it to work toward making a final cross section, right? So let's start with one of the options, which is the section properties options. So the first thing that I want to choose to change is the height of this cross section. So it's going from my 200. So I guess we can decrease it to minus 1,000 and 1,200, something like this. I think that's good enough. We can change the vertical exaggeration as well. So we can change it to, for example, to 1 and see how that looks like. Maybe let's get it back to 2. And yeah, let's say that I'm happy with that. I'm gonna click OK at this stage. And let's now work with the zones and the style of those zones. So if I go into the grid layer, you see that again, I'm displaying grid data from a model in Petrel. So if I organize them, I see that I'm displaying these 3 particular horizons. There is a stratigraphic order that Petrosys will try to establish the correct stratigraphic order of those grids. If it is not right, then as a user, you can move them up and down. So that will be used when we are going to populate the zones. And there are other options, like if you don't have surface fault surfaces, you can auto-generate or almost close faults. That sort of options that are available. Let's go to the style of the surface. In this case, all of them have the same style. So let's play a little bit about with the style. So this is the default one. I want to make it the names to the center. So I'm going to click apply. So the name of each surface now it's in the center of that whole compartment. And let's play a little bit with the style. So to make it different, so I'm going to override the default style. For this top, I will leave it the line color as blue. But if I go to the next particular surface, I'm gonna make it red. And then for the last one, let's make it perhaps some green. So we make sure that all of them are different colors. So if I now zoom in, so I see that each one of those surfaces has different styles. So let's play a little bit with the zones as well. So you have now those first two tabs are related to the surfaces, so what we are displaying, and then how we are displaying. And then the next two tabs are about what zones we're displaying and the style of those zones. So Petrosys will try to auto-populate the zones as I just did, and has establishes that there are probably 3 zones. As a user, then you will need to make sure that those are the relevant zones. And in the last tab, the zone style is where you choose the style of each individual. You have a default style, and then you have individual styles of each one of those zones. The only change that I will do is I will turn off the annotation, and I'm gonna click OK. And we see that this is the style for each one of those zones. You have the structures, you have your well data, you have your well log data that you can display because it's being carried across from the mapping application when I launch it. Let's say that if there is a particular zone that is not right, you can select it, right click, and you can assign to a different zone by right-clicking and select Zone Assign Zone, or if you go to Zone Style, it will take you to the same panel that I was before, where you can manually overwrite the styles of each of those zones. So if at some point the zones that has been populated is not the right one, it's just simple as selecting it, right-clicking, and assign zone, and it will take all of the zones that you have available, and you choose the right one. So you're making sure that the selected zone is being assigned in your cross section. Let's improve a little bit about the well display. So I have a symbol here and a name here. Let's make it a little bit better. So if I go to the well layers data, again, you also have the log signatures as you have in mapping from, in this case, from these stops. I just want to change the annotations to the bottom and make it a bit bigger, and also make a bit bigger the symbology at the end. So if I click OK, now I see the annotations and the wall symbols displayed a bit better. And let's say that this is all the data that I wanted to display. So now it's time to improve the layout properties of my cross section. To do that, you will go to layout properties, and here is where you populate all the details or the zones, the background colors. You can change the background colors of particular areas. You can start to add some grid lines. You can add some titles. You can add some annotations. So for example, if I can say that from west to east and click apply, and let me make it a bit bigger here, and that's how you start building your annotations in order to make it sorry, that's the offset, not the actual size, something like this. And here's where you make all the elements to make it a quality cross section that you can include in reports and solve like that. Instead of doing all those steps, I already have prepared a final cross sections that I will show you. And that's sorry, here, this is the one. So this is a final one. So it's basically the same data that I have been working so far. It's just that I have added all the elements that make it a good final cross section. So I have added a title, I have had some styling options, I have added some grid lines, some image on the top left, and some text, additional text that makes it a final map, a final cross section. So if I wanted to export this into a raster image, all I needed to do is go from File, Export, or right from the map, as from the cross section as well. Right click, select Export, and we can choose raster image. So we give it a name. So in this case, it's a PNG format. And we have the resolution. So I click OK, and it will start to create my cross section into a raster image. And that's how you will make to export your map out of the cross section, right? So that's one way of working with the cross section tool. As I said, launch it from within mapping. To finalize this option, I can launch from here the 3D viewer. And as I said, it will move the data, or not move, carry the data that we have into the cross section into the 3D viewer. And if we put them side by side, we see that the same data that we have here has been carried across the wells, the horizons, and also the section line has been added as a reference plane into my 3D viewer. So if I, for example, now I could move that cross section and move that reference plane and see how that works. I could also do some picking here. So if I, for example, move here in the cross section tool by holding the cursor down, I'll see how that also is being represented in the 3D viewer. So for example, if I also could move that section here and rotate it from here in the 3D viewer, or just turn off this particular reference plane and do again what I just did, just holding down the cursor in the cross-section model, and I get a readings in the 3D viewer of each one of those structures that you have here. So that's how you will combine the cross-section tool with the 3D viewer, and from mapping into the 3D viewer, all the cursor tracking sharing is a nice functionality to compare in different environments, right? So that's the first of the two examples that I have prepared. So let me close this one here, and I'm gonna save it. Let's close this one here, and I'm gonna save this one here. And let's close this one here, which already have finished. And now I will launch the cross section from scratch from the Petrosys PRO main launcher. So I launch the cross section. So instead of launching mapping from the cross section, now I'm going to use some of the drag and drop functionality that we have in the software. So I'm going to do some drag and drop from my Petro project that I have open in the background. So I have it on the side. So I will start maybe displaying some well data. So I select the wells that I have from Petro and drag it and drop it into Petrosys, and other well data that I have here that I want to drag and drop. I can display some horizon data from a particular model. So I'm going to drag it and drop it. For polygon, that is not carried through, but all the grids has been carried through. So that's all that I wanted to do, drag and drop. I'm going to minimize here. I could also drag and drop some Excel data. So for example, I can drag and drop this microseismic data that is stored in an Excel spreadsheet, and that is being displayed here. Or I could just, let me remove it from here. I can also do it from the menu in Petrosys PRO. So if I go to display GIS, I have that particular Excel spreadsheet that I just did the drag and drop. Petrosys will try to automatically realize what type of data that we're working with. I will try to assign the different attributes. So as a user, you will have to make sure that it's the right one. So I'm going to select an attribute that I would use to as a set value. So it's this one particular set value. So it's in positive. So I need, because I'm working with an inverted scale, I have to choose an scale and invert. Let's say that I'm happy with the way that it's been displaying. I click OK. And now I have my seismicity data that is being also displayed here. So if I update my plan And if I make this a little bit bigger, so I can play within this schematic in the same way that I will do it in mapping window. So I have the zoom options, the mapping, all of those options. So I see that cross section is going through from following this line. So if I wanted to improve that definition, I will select it and then I will make it bigger. And you see how different wells in different areas are displayed as I increase the size. And that's how you will work. I could perhaps make it much, much smaller. And then using the control key down, maybe changing the orientation of that particular one, and let's make the envelope much smaller. So you see, for example, how that microseismicity data that is being displayed as red disappear or appears as I increase this envelope, the size of that cross section, what is projected into that section line, and that's something that it's very easy to work with in this new release. So that's again, at this stage, I will start to improve how that cross section looks like. I have, again, one that I have already prepared, a final one, and it will look like this. I have some image from a logo from Petrosys, all that microseismicity data for surfaces, different cross section with different zones that I have been playing with. And obviously I have that microseismicity data that has been added, and I also added the values so I can have it here as well. I could launch the 3D viewer again just to see how that looks in the 3D viewer. It will carry across all this data. The display of point data still hasn't been added to this release, so I'll have to add it again manually here. So I'm going to put them side by side, and I'm going to display that point data, the same point data that I have on my cross-section tool, which is, I can see it here at the bottom right. So if I turn off the reference plane, which represents the section line that I have here, I have my all the data that I have moved from the cross-section tool into the 3D viewer. And again, I can do some cursor tracking by holding the cursor down in my cross-section tool, and I see how that is been looking in the 3D viewer. Finally, I can export this as I just right-click on the cross-section tool, go to export. I could export it into a PDF document, into a new format that we have added, which is becoming very popular and very common in the industry, the SVG or scalable vector graphics, into a PowerPoint presentation. So if I click here into PowerPoint, it asks me the set of resolution that I want, and click OK. And if I go back now to my PowerPoint presentation, has been add that cross section into my presentation, and that's the last bit that I wanted to show you from for this webinar, and just basically those two ways of working with the cross-section tool, launching it from within mapping or starting from scratch and using the drag and drop. So just before finishing, just some final thoughts on this new application. So fast and easy way, it provides you a fast and easy way to create a cross-section. You can create a line of section from a mapping window, as I showed you. It's the whole Petrosys PRO application. We consider it's more powerful than ever because you can view surfaces in the cross section before and after editing or after regridding, and all your data is one place, so you can display the data from third-party applications and comparing cross sections. So it's important to highlight that all this data in this case has been displayed from a particular Petro project, and no duplication of data has been taking place because it's a dynamic link from Petrosys into the third-party application. So if the original input data changes, all your cross-section to maps, or your cross-section, your maps on 3D views will get automatically updated because it's a link to the source, and make sure that it's always up to date. Thanks for your attention and for attending the webinar. It's really appreciated. Thank you very much.